You open the dishwasher and steam fogs your glasses. This is the last load of the night, another long shift almost finished. You reach down for a pot glass, give it a quick dry with your tea towel and place it back on the rack. And as you reach down for a second glass, from above your head, you hear the floor creak. It's the sound these old boards make when somebody puts their weight on them. You know it well. When people are upstairs, you hear it all the time. It's an unmistakable part of the rhythm of the pub. Except there's no one up there at this time of night. You locked all of the doors yourself not 20 minutes ago, after you'd closed up for the evening. And then another board creaks. And then the one next to it. And the next. Somebody is walking upstairs. The footsteps cross the room above you. They're unhurried. It's a man's walk. It's not a scurry. It's not an animal. There are mice here in the pub, but none of them reach the weight of a human. And you just stand there in the dark of the public bar and you follow him across the ceiling with your eyes. The noise stops. He stops. And you head upstairs. Because someone has to. You've got to make sure that a drunken reveller hasn't stowed away upstairs for the night. Someone has to put a hand on the banister and climb the stairs of the Steam Packet Inn, a building that has been standing here since 1863. You take a deep breath, you reach out, and you flick the light switch. Nothing. The doors are all locked. There's no one there. All things considered though, seeing no one, seeing nothing, is a pretty good outcome. Some of your colleagues weren't so lucky. They've told you the story of the man in a black cape and a pointed hat. He's seen sometimes about this place, out of the corner of somebody's eye, making his way across the floorboards. He's an opera singer, they say. And he's not the only long-term resident here at the Steam Packet Inn. G'day. Welcome back to Strewth. I'm your storyteller, Mark, and tonight we head to King Williamstown, or Williamstown as it's now known. The suburb has changed a bit since the Steam Packet Inn was built. In fact, it's changed a lot. A nice place, a bit swish even. Cafes on the water, boats in the marina, people walking spoilt little dogs along the foreshore. It hasn't always been this way though. Williamstown has a very chequered past. It's been home to convicts and vagabonds, a wide range of characters over the years. And the tales that I'm going to tell you tonight have been passed down in the pubs of Williamstown, from one regular to the next, to the next. So make of them what you will. But they can all be traced back to real people, real events, as I'll also demonstrate to you tonight. A number of the tales come from Jackie, the host of Lantern Ghost Tours in Williamstown. So if these tales send a shiver down your spine, I'd recommend a pot or two at the Steam Packet, and then a walking tour with Jackie to get the full King Williamstown experience. Also tonight, a special bonus. For the first time, we'll also hear from a Strewth listener. I'll be reading Maddie's petrifying tale that began in yet another pub here in Williamstown. But let's get back to that mysterious man in the black cape and pointed hat. After a fire had ripped through the suburb in the 1850s, the Steam Packet Inn was rebuilt as it currently stands in 1863. And in 1870, a man took a room upstairs at that pub. His name was John de Haga, And once upon a time he had been somebody. An opera singer, in fact. He had sung with Leicester's Opera Company, which in Melbourne of that era meant something. And before that, he had performed across the globe in places most of his audience would never even dream about visiting. But by 1870, he was taking work at a music hall in Bourke Street, and a second-class one at that. He said as much to an old friend before he accepted the gig, spoke achingly about the come-down of it all, about going from the world's grandest opera houses to singing for a few pounds a week to a bunch of drunks with no real interest in the arts. He went to rehearsals 2 or 3 times for this new gig in Bourke Street, and somewhere in those rehearsals, standing in an empty music hall, John de Haga worked out that his voice was gone. Not tired, not strained, but gone. He could not trust himself to open his mouth in front of an audience and to know what would come out. And for an opera singer, this was devastating. He asked the producer of the show for a few pounds in advance, but he was refused. He owed money, you see. He owed quite a deal of money to his own landlord. And so, on a Thursday evening, he went down to Williamstown and took lodgings at the Steam Packet Inn. He was supposed to make his first appearance of this new show on a Friday night. And on the Friday morning, he said he was unwell and went to lay down for a while. Then he got up, had a nip of spirits and went for a long walk along the beach. Staff say that he came back around 1 o'clock, had several more drinks, and went quietly up to his room. A few moments later, punters in the bar heard a single shot from a pistol. They rushed upstairs to find the door of de Haga's room bolted from the inside. They sent for the local police, who broke the door open, and there he was, on the floor, his lifeless body sitting up against the trunk that he had taken with him around the globe. There was no letter, nothing to explain why, and this from a man who had never in his life been short of something to say. But it certainly wasn't to be the last of de Haga's performances. Even in his death, he has continued to be the star of the show, and he has remained top billing at the Steam Packet Inn. Those who have lived and worked there over the years attribute many a strange event to de Haga. The creeping across the floorboards, like we mentioned in the opener, is just the beginning. Picture the pub at closing time. Last drinks have been served, the glasses are up on the rack, and the lights are down over the bar. And there is just one person left in the room, doing the float, wanting to go home. And out of the corner of your eye, a glass moves. Not falls, moves, travels along the bar the length of your arm, and stops. And there's nobody anywhere near it. You are the only one in the room. And so you stare at it for a long time. And you do what any sane, rational person does. Your brain scrambles for the mundane explanation. I'm just tired, you tell yourself, imagining things. Too many Red Bulls, perhaps. Or maybe it did move. It somehow slipped along the wet bar. You convince yourself that there's nothing to it, and so you go back to counting the money in the till. But de Haga takes your nonchalant response as something of a challenge. You begin to hear, faint, singing. It's coming from nowhere in particular, but also everywhere all at once. Opera singing. Strained, emotional. You drop the cash and scamper underneath the table. There's no rational thought behind your movements, just panic, fear. In the far corner of the room, an area backlit by an orangey red neon strip on the bar. You see it. Just a shadow at first, that slowly forms into a shape. A man in a black cloak with a pointy black cap. the only word you're capable to muster at this point, falls gently off the edge of your bottom lip with a whimper. Strewth. He's not alone though, John de Haga. In 1888, 18 years after de Haga died at the steam packet, a young woman also met her end at the very same pub. Her name was Jane Nichols. She was just 18 years old and worked tirelessly behind the bar. The inquest into her unusual death was also held at the steam packet inn. For the time, an inquest was a perfectly ordinary thing to host in a pub, a building that had the only room big enough in town for a coroner and a jury and a body and the public. But it was much rarer that the death that was being investigated occurred in exactly the same building. The building that Jane Nichols had worked and lived in front of the man who employed her, and in front of his wife. The story that the police had been given, the story that they had come to the steam packet to test, was that Jane's death had been caused by eating camphor. Camphor at the time was in every house in the colony. Perhaps the easiest way for us to think about it now would be to imagine an old-fashioned version of Vicks. Chemists sold it loose over the counter. It was a waxy white substance used on the skin and taken for coughs, for pain, for a runny nose. As with most medication in the late 1800s though, the processes used to develop it weren't as refined as we're now used to, and there were very real side effects. A medical journal of the day warned families to stop running to the camphor bottle for every trifling ailment, because camphor was a poison and overuse could cause long-term damage. Camphorated oil was a common household remedy of the time too, and this was a mix of about 20% camphor and 80% vegetable oil. This dilution made it possible to use camphor for internal issues like stomach pain or for its laxative effects. Eating straight camphor, however, as the police were told Jane was doing prior to her death, was highly dangerous. Even a small amount could seriously harm or kill a person. The government analyst, the man charged with finding out what really happened to Jane, was a man named Blackett. And he noted during an autopsy of her body that the smell of camphor was noted in her stomach. He also completed a search for any other known poison and found none. It's important to note, however, that although he did find camphor in her system, he told those at the inquest that, in his opinion, there was simply not enough to produce a fatal result. Regardless, the jury returned a verdict of death from congestion of the brain caused by eating camphor, in ignorance of what evil effects might follow. All rather dramatic, isn't it? There's something else I need to tell you about camphor before we move on though. In the 19th century, women took it to end a pregnancy. There is a case from 1860, a woman 4 months gone swallowed just 12 grains of camphor to bring on a miscarriage. But it was too much. She was in agony for 3 days and she then died. Jane Nichols, remember, at the time was 18. She was unmarried, and she was living in a rented room above a public bar. She was found dead with a small amount of camphor in her system. And the story that came before the coroner was that she had been taking it for pains in her stomach. There is no evidence to suggest that this is relevant to Jane's story. None at all. In fact, the autopsy of her stomach makes no mention of a pregnancy whatsoever. But there are elements of this version of events that fit the evidence. Pregnancy is the most common reason a young woman at that time had straight camphor anywhere near her mouth in the first place. The other reason that I mention it is that it also aligns with the law attached to this incident. The version that has come down at the steam packet, drinker to drinker, across 140 years is that Jane was given the camphor by somebody, perhaps to ease stomach complaints, perhaps for another more nefarious purpose, and that somebody was the publican's wife, Margaret Dobbin. Based on the scant amount of evidence that we have, I think we can interpret that in 3 different ways. Maybe this was a friendly woman taking pity on a young lady with a sore stomach. Perhaps she fixes her a camphorated oil mix that is simply too strong, and it leads to an accidental death. Or this is a woman who saw a frightened girl in trouble and quietly tried to help her the only way anybody could in 1888. People perhaps drawing the wrong conclusions about the identity of the man that was responsible for Jane's precarious situation. Or, as the law tends to suggest, this was a woman with a scandal brewing under her own roof. A scandal that involved not only Jane, but also her husband, the publican. A woman who used camphor in a very intentional manner to make that scandal disappear. Whatever the case, she was standing in the front bar when they held the inquest. The same front bar where her name is still talked about to this very day, with the same questions being asked of her character and her potential involvement in Jane's demise. But it is not Jane Nichols whose spirit is said to hover at the steam packet. Nobody has ever claimed to see her floating over the stairs. Nobody hears her crying out in pain in the room she died in. 140 years later, and the girl at the centre of this tragedy has not showed herself once. Somebody else connected to her, though, is still very much a regular here at the steam packet. And we know almost nothing about him. Not his surname, not what he did for a living. Only that he drank at the steam packet at the time of Jane's death, and he spent a great deal of time there. We also know about his more recent behaviour. Let's start with the cupboard, because everybody who works there knows about the cupboard. It's upstairs, on the first floor. The stairs at the steam packet are old and narrow, and about halfway up the noise of the bar starts to thin. By the time you reach the landing, you can still hear the ruckus from down below, the clinking of glasses, somebody laughing at something. But the sound has gone flat and far away through the carpet and the floorboards. You've been sent up here for a reason. Some boxes of cutlery, and they're in the cupboard. Charles's cupboard. You put your hand on the handle, and it knocks. Not a creak, a distinct knock made by knuckles from the inside of the cupboard. But you don't run. You would think that you would run, but it's the middle of an ordinary afternoon, and the sun is shining through on the carpet, and there's a bloke downstairs laughing about something. It's all just too ordinary to be frightened. And so you slowly, gently, pull the handle of the cupboard toward you. It opens without a creak, without a sound. Nothing. Old plates. Boxes. The cutlery you suddenly remember being sent here for in the first place. You stand there and look inside the cupboard for a moment and then simply make your way back down the stairs. And by the time you reach the bottom, the noise of the bar has closed back over you and it's just an ordinary afternoon again. And somebody's waving at you, trying to get your attention, wanting another beer. And these types of interactions, the calm, gentle ones, are always attributed to Charles. They're in stark contrast to the showy, raucous escapades of the ghost of John DeHaga. They seem to have an entirely different purpose. It's not just the knocking of the cupboard either, it's the occasional appearances Charles makes too. People don't walk away feeling as though he's trying to frighten them, more that he's seeking their attention, as though he's trying to reveal something to them. Charles, the regular sort of ghost, who was once a regular at the bar that Jane worked behind. A man who was there in the same spot every single day. A man who knew which girl worked which shift. A man who knew the licensee and the licensee's wife. A man who watched, over months and years, the small ordinary traffic of an 1800s public house. A man who was at the bar so often that people stopped performing in front of him because he had just become furniture. So what is Charles trying to tell us? Did he see something? Did he watch Jane get sick over those last weeks? Did he see who was looking after her and how they were going about it? Did he see somebody hand her something across that bar and think nothing of it at the time, but then think about it very clearly after she succumbed to poisoning? Or is it simpler than that? Was Charles the man Jane told things to? Because a barmaid in 1888 does not have many people she can tell things to. No family to speak of, perhaps no real friends either. But she does have her regulars, and she knows them as well as she knows anybody. And maybe there's one bloke in particular who's always there, always kind. He's gone by 7, never the kind to give her any type of trouble. Not the sort of person to say a word about a big secret to anybody. And if that's true, if she did tell him what was really going on, then Charles might be the only living soul who ever knew why that camphor ended up in her stomach. And when the coppers came sniffing around in the days after her death, in the moments that the licensee, or perhaps his wife, told them about Jane's camphor habit, he was most likely sitting on the same stool in the same bar that he always drank in. And when they started to ask questions about the kind young lass who poured his beer and laughed at his dumb jokes, he said nothing. Maybe that's because he didn't know anything at all, but maybe it's because he kept his word to Jane. Maybe he kept her secret. And despite all of his efforts in the years since, we'll never know. It's still there, the steam packet, Cole Street, Williamstown. You can go and have a beer in it tonight. There's trivia on a Wednesday and a footy tipping comp too. Be mindful though. As we've mentioned, the steam packet has a history that extends well beyond the fire that burnt it down in the first place. And some of the regulars have a tendency to make a real nuisance of themselves. It's time for a special Strewth bonus story. This one was sent in by a loyal listener, Matty. It's his story about a very strange night out that he had with his mates a couple of decades ago. It started with a few beers at a pub in Williamstown, and so I thought it would fit in nicely to this evening's show. So here's Matty's story, in his words, about one of the weirdest nights he has ever experienced. We'd just finished watching Essendon knock off Fremantle at the Victoria Inn in Williamstown, and someone suggested we continue the night's festivities in the city. Everyone was keen. especially the two Bombers fans who really wanted to make a proper night of it. It was the middle of winter in the Bayside suburb. The air was so fresh you could feel it at the back of your throat every time you inhaled. And so, escaping the cold, we piled into the red Ford Falcon XR8, and the conversation quickly turned to what venues we did once we reached the Big Smoke. But deep down we all knew the best nights were the ones without a plan. Someone suggested we quickly stop in to see Al, a mate of ours, and invite him out on the town too. He'd recently moved into a rental in one of the more affluent parts of the suburb, and the word on the street was his new place was unbelievable. We were all a bit curious. We wanted to know if this new place was all it was cracked up to be, and if so, how the hell he could afford it. And so Pearl Jam provided the soundtrack for our short drive over to Al's place. As we pulled up opposite the house, even the darkness couldn't hide how impressive it was. A warm light glowed from the front veranda, illuminating oversized double doors and a large blue pot with a leafy plant sitting beside it. A street lamp on the nature strip cast a pale yellow light across the front yard, enough to reveal neatly trimmed shrubs and manicured garden beds. This place did live up to all expectation. Two of my mates, Jono and Macca, went inside while Billy and I waited in the back of the car. They crossed the road with the confidence of strapping young men without a care in the world, and meanwhile Billy and I sat in the car admiring the place and speculating about what the rent must be stinging him in a place like that. And we watched as they made their way up the driveway to the veranda. Just before they reached the front door, though, another figure exited through the double doors and drifted past them. A few moments later, we noticed that she hadn't kept walking. She simply stood near the glow of the streetlight, not directly beneath it, but just outside the brightest part of the light. The best description that I can give of her would be homeless. A harsh judgment perhaps, but everything about her suggested a hard life. Her hair was tangled and unkempt. A small throw rug hung around her shoulders like a shawl. She was wearing a dirty pink night top that read, "Just Do It," with grey tracky pants, gathered around a pair of very worn moccasins. And clutched against her chest was a bottle wrapped in brown paper, her left hand curled tightly around its neck. Billy and I lowered our voices without even realising it. We were both staring across the road at her. "I need a smoke," he said as he began winding down the rear driver's side window. "Mate," I said, "the second you light that thing, she's going to cross the road and ask for one." He scoffed at the suggestion. But a few seconds later, the orange glow of his lighter flickered to life, and the woman's head turned immediately. The cigarette hadn't even reached his lips before she started walking toward us. The cold air flooded the car through the open window, and I could hear the soft scuffing of moccasins against the asphalt. "Good on ya," I muttered. "How are you, boys?" the woman asked as she approached the car, and instantly we noticed that there was something wrong with her voice. Not threatening, more like unhealthy, like something was lodged in her throat. "Good, thanks, love," Billy replied. "You reckon I could bum a drag?" she asked. Normally, I love being right, especially when it comes to proving Billy wrong, but in that moment, I wished I wasn't. I wished she'd never crossed that road. As she leaned closer to the window, the smell hit us. It wasn't body odour, and it wasn't cigarette smoke either. It was something far worse, something burnt. A thick, toxic smell that seemed to be entrenched in her clothes. It wafted through the open car window and buried itself deep inside our nasal cavities. Despite the stink, Billy remained polite, but I did notice him turning his head occasionally, scrambling to catch fresh air as he spoke to her. The woman was friendly enough. She even offered us a sip from a bottle of wine. There was nothing threatening in her demeanour, and if anything, she gave off a sense of sadness. But beneath the sadness and the stench, something still felt really quite wrong. I could feel it on a primal level, and I think I could see it now in Billy's demeanour too. I started to ponder the red flags. For starters, she'd appeared to come from our mate's house. In fact, Billy and I watched her walk straight past Macca and Jono as they approached the front door. And secondly, she looked to be in her late 40s. It was difficult to tell exactly because she was so weathered and dirty, and the lines on her face suggested a rough life. I knew our mate, Al, and couldn't figure out why he would have been socialising with a 40-something homeless woman. The whole thing again feeling even more off with every passing moment. And a sense of panic now started to overwhelm me. I started wondering what was taking the boys so long. Surely it shouldn't take more than a minute or two to invite our mate out on the town. And then Jono and Macca emerged from the house, and immediately I noticed something strange in them. They weren't displaying the confident and carefree swagger they had when they were entering in their house. Their pace was cautious, measured, perhaps even a little frightened. Both of them were staring directly at the woman standing beside the car. And she had clearly, even from across the road, frightened them too. The woman stopped talking and turned her attention toward them. She stood erect, still, almost military in her stance, and yet still clutching that bottle and saying nothing. And for the first time in 10 minutes, there was silence. Jono clambered into the driver's seat. The interior light came on. I'd known this man for years. He was physically imposing. The sort of bloke who met frightening situations with equal parts adrenaline and stupidity. He was a man prone to ego-fueled bravado. But in this moment, that look on his face was fear. Real fear. In the passenger seat, Macca started frantically looking out of all of the windows, twisting his head, contorting his body. Who the hell was that? Where did she come from, he yelled. Where has she gone? Billy and I began to giggle, thinking that this was a bit of a wind-up now. But as we started to look through the windows too, the street was void of the figure that we had been chatting to only moments earlier. You walked right past her, we explained. Nonsense, came the reply. The tyres chirped as Jono pulled away from the curb at haste. No, seriously, I said, you walked right past her when you went into Al's place. The house disappeared behind us as we turned out of the street. More silence. The engine hummed. Macca stared blankly out the window. He took a deep breath. And even now I remember the slight tremble in his voice. It's Al, he said. The whole time we were inside, Al was blabbering on, telling us about a woman who used to squat there in the house. We thought he'd lost his mind, but there was a pause, and then he continued. She was in her late 40s, Macca explained. It was winter, no power. She got drunk and lit a fire on the carpet to keep warm. Another pause. They found her well after the house had already filled with smoke. It was too late. My stomach tightened. When they found her, he looked at us in the back seat. She was still clutching a bottle of wine. Nobody in that car said a word for a good 5 minutes. Macca went on to explain that that is why the house had been rented so cheaply, after the refurbishment. We didn't know what to make of it. We still don't. Was it coincidence? Did we happen to speak to a random homeless woman clutching a bottle of wine at exactly the same time that Al was inside telling Jono and Macca a story about a homeless woman who died in his house, clutching a bottle of wine? And Billy and I were adamant that the lady we spoke with had walked past the two of them not 10 minutes earlier, straight out of Al's place. There was never an explanation for that either. What I do know for sure is that I saw true fear in the eyes of my mates that night, and we have not been able to rationally explain the event to this day. It's fair to say that none of us felt much like partying in the city after that. Thanks for sending in your tale, matey. I really appreciate it, mate, and all the support that you give to the show. If you've got a weird and wonderful tale that you'd like me to read out, strewthpodcast@gmail.com. That's not all that King Williamstown has to offer, though. There's plenty of other ghosts and ghouls. There are quite a few stories attached to the most prominent structure in town, the Time Ball Tower. The final time ball operator, Richard Vaughan, who died in 1926, is said to remain devoted to the tower. Visitors have reported seeing both Richard and his wife. And as an added bonus, there's also a mysterious lady in white who appears in the upper windows of the tower and sometimes even follows visitors. Richard is also reputed to be very protective of the building, with stories claiming that he has pushed visitors, including both a police officer and a solicitor, on the tower stairs. And then there's the tale of John Price, the one-time Inspector General of Penal Establishments, whose brutal treatment of convicts earned him widespread hatred. In 1857, Price was attacked by a gang of prisoners and quarry workers, suffering catastrophic injuries from which he died the following day. And he too is said to haunt the tower. Witnesses have reported seeing him looking down from the upper floors, hearing heavy footsteps on the ladders and experiencing an oppressive atmosphere inside the building. If you'd like to hear some of these further stories, perhaps leave a comment. And don't forget, please head down to see Jackie, the host of Lantern Ghost Tours in Williamstown. She'll be more than happy to introduce you to the stars of this evening's show on one of her walks. But that's all from me. Thanks again for your support of Strewth. It's going from strength to strength, and I really appreciate it. If you haven't already, join us over on Facebook, Instagram. Crikey, I'm even having a crack at TikTok, although I've got no idea what I'm doing. But come and join us. And if you can't get enough of Strewth, don't forget Strewth Premium. I think there's 19 cases there now available on Patreon or Apple subscriptions. I'll be sure to put the links in the show notes. Next week, we'll be covering a true crime case from here in Australia, one that I hadn't heard of before, so I'm looking forward to sharing that with you, to get your thoughts. It's a sad and puzzling case, with no clear answer. Until then, hooroo.